Okay. Cervical spine.
So cervical spine, we're gonna do flexion and extension, and that is in the sagittal plane. You can do lateral, left lateral flexion or right lateral flexion, that is in the frontal plane. Yeah, I said left lateral flexion. And then you can do left rotation and right rotation, that is in the transverse plane. Thoracic lumbar spine, we can do flexion and extension. Flexion and extension, that is in the sagittal plane, and this is a gliding joint, by the way. And then we can do lateral flexion, left lateral flexion or side bending, right lateral flexion or side bending.
What plane?
Is it a, oh, this is frontal plane. This was the sagittal plane. What else can our hips do? Oh, rotation. So we have left rotation and right rotation, that is in the transverse plane. So shoulder or glenohumeral joint is a ball and socket. It can do flexion or extension in the sagittal plane. It can do adduction or abduction in the frontal plane. It can do horizontal adduction or abduction in the transverse plane, along with the internal or external rotation in the transverse plane.
One more. Multiplanar.
We have circumduction is in the multiplane. Is a multiplanar. The next joint is the elbow joint. It is a hinge joint or glenohumeroid.
Ginglymoid.
It's responsible for flexion and extension, which is in the sagittal plane. Then we have the wrist, which is a condyloid joint. It's responsible for flexion and extension in the sagittal plane, ulnar deviation or radial deviation in the frontal plane.
And the forearm.
And then the forearm is responsible. The forearm is a
pivot.
It's a pivot joint. It's responsible for pronation and supination in the transverse plane. The next we'll do the fingers. This is a condyloid joint, the MCP. It's responsible for flexion and extension in the sagittal plane, and then also abduction and adduction in the frontal plane. And then we have extension and flexion of the IP joint. It is that's in the sagittal plane, and it is also a condyloid joint. No, hinge joint. It's a hinge joint. The fingers are IP joints are hinge joints.
And your thumb.
Then we have the thumb, which is a saddle or cellular joint. It's responsible for opposition and reposition, and it's multiplanar. So the next we're gonna do is the hip joint, which is a ball and socket or sphericoid joint. It's responsible for flexion and extension in the sagittal plane. It is responsible for abduction and adduction in the frontal plane. It's responsible for internal or external rotation in the transverse plane, and is also responsible for circumduction. Then we have the knee joint, which is a hinge joint. It's responsible for flexion and extension in the sagittal plane. Then we have the wrist, ankle, which is responsible for the ankle is a hinge joint, which is responsible for dorsiflexion and plantar flexion in the sagittal plane. Then it has inversion or eversion, inversion or eversion in the frontal plane. Then it also has the pronation, which is, isn't it,
Up and out.
up and out, and then the supination, which is down and pointed,
Down and in.
down and in,
And
which is in the, is it multiplanar?
mhm.
It's multiplanar. Then we have, next is the toes, which is a condynoid or condynoid and hinge joint. It's responsible for flexion and extension in the sagittal plane, and then abduction and adduction in the frontal plane. Cool, I'm putting my shoes back on. So next is the shoulder girdle. It is responsible for elevation, depression, protraction, and retraction.
Yeah.
Next is the mandibular joint. It's when the jaw's going down, that's depression, and when the jaw's coming up, that is elevation. Then you have pronation and retraction.
Protraction.
Protraction and retraction.
Okay.